Hey guys, Britt here. Welcome to End Times Bible Prophecy. Make sure to hit the subscribe, like, and share buttons. Well, how did this happen? This is a question that's been coming up. I've been meaning to address this for several weeks now, really, because it keeps coming up. But what am I talking about? I'm talking about the October 7th Hamas attack on Israel, the breaching of Israel's border security. And we keep getting a bunch of questions coming up from people saying, how was this even possible? The IDF is the most invincible fighting force on the planet. Mossad, Israeli intelligence, is, all-knowing, and therefore they had to have known about this attack. They had people on the ground who had infiltrated Hamas. They had to know this was coming. And of course, then they go on to say, well, they let this happen in order to create the conditions to fight the war they're fighting right now. And so I want to address this because, first of all, I don't necessarily discount such things. Unlike the mainstream media, we don't try to shut down dissenting views by claiming they're conspiracy theories, because we often know sometimes conspiracy theories turn out to be the truth. But I'm going to ask tough questions of people who are putting that out there, because I think there's several things we need to address to make sure that what prevails is the truth, because many of Israel's enemies are pushing this narrative that this was somehow an inside job with Israel. They let this happen. And that is, I believe, not the case. We're going to talk about what is the official narrative of what happened. We're going to talk about, most importantly, the premise, because again, I have no problem with people asking hard questions. They should ask those hard questions. But I'm going to ask very hard questions about the premise that people are putting out there that we just addressed, because this idea that it was impossible for this to happen to Israel is, I believe, exactly why it did happen. And then we're going to talk about what comes next, what comes in the days and weeks after this, because unfortunately, I believe that this actually creates the conditions to make this conflict escalate. So let's talk about how did this happen. Now let's look, there's several articles here I'm going to put links to in the description. I'll pin them in the top of the comments so you can go read this for yourself. But if you've been reading the article, and we're not going to go into all of the details here, but here we have the Times of Israel, how Hamas busted Israel's defenses. We've got ABC News, a detailed look at how Hamas secretly crossed into Israel, and they look at video footage that was put out publicly and piece that together. We look at The Guardian. How did Hamas manage to carry out its rampage through southern Israel? Or The Spokesman Review, how Hamas broke through Israel's border defenses during October 7th attack. So we can look at how they targeted communications infrastructure. There's evidence that they actually were tracking the phones of members of the IDF, and therefore they knew exactly where they were and how to attack them and take them out. They clearly gathered meticulous intelligence on how the border was secured and where its vulnerabilities were, and they were able to exploit that. So again, all of this, we're not going to go into all of the details. I'll put links here so you can read that if you're curious. Odds are maybe you already know those things at this point. Certainly there could be other reasons. There are questions people can raise about it. But what I want to talk about today is this idea, this premise, that it is impossible for this to have happened without Israel knowing about it, because Israel's enemies are using this. And again, if it's true, so be it. But I don't think that it is. I'm going to knock down this premise completely, because the truth matters, guys. The truth is what we should be seeking out. And so what is this premise? This premise is, well, this is impossible. It could not have occurred because the IDF is the most sophisticated, well-trained invincible fighting force on the planet. Israeli intelligence is all-knowing. They've got assets on the ground, infiltrating every organization. They would know exactly what was going to happen when this was planned, or they were tipped off by foreign intelligence services. They knew this was going to happen, and therefore they could have prevented it. And of course, that discounts that even if they did hear rumblings of this, whenever events like this happen, people often point out, well, the intelligence service, this came in the door. We hear this with Pearl Harbor, with 9/11, with a bunch of different events that happened. Well, the intelligence service knew about this. Here's the evidence that they knew about it, and they didn't do anything. But those people, they're selectively looking at that. They're discounting that, well, all the other days before that, they also received intelligence that another attack was going to happen that didn't. And those never make the news, right? So in hindsight's 2020, you can look at intelligence or bits of information that came in the door and say they should have been pieced together. But I think that this idea that people are pushing, that Israel is invincible, its intelligence service is all-knowing, is precisely the reason that this attack by Hamas reached the level of success it did, because not only did a lot of people around the world believe this, but I believe people within the organization believed it as well. And that led to something we might call institutional inertia, meaning there was this malaise, this sense of invulnerability that led to not necessarily laziness, but overlooking certain vulnerabilities. So for example, let's look at another organization. Back when I was born, I'm going to date myself here. If you're any amount younger than me, you probably would go, I've never even heard of this company. But if you're my age or older, you know exactly the company I'm talking about. That when I was born, the dominant retailer in the United States was Sears Roebuck Corporation. Sears was everywhere. They were located anywhere people lived in the United States. There was probably a Sears within 20 or 30 minutes, probably multiple Sears locations within 20 or 30 minutes. This company was cutting edge, 19th century. They were probably the 19th century version of Amazon, as railroad tracks were being laid all across the United States. Sears Roebuck came out with this Sears catalog, and you could order pretty much anything by mail, including houses, right? You could order a house for, I think, like $1,500, build this thing yourself. In fact, some of those houses still exist today. They were so well made. But they dominated mail order. Then they set up retail establishments, dominated that as well. Back in the 1970s, they had this huge tower in Chicago known as the Sears Tower, where their headquarters were. It's one of the tallest buildings in the world. They were the behemoth of retailing. And so if you would ask your average person on the street, 30 years from now, where do you think Sears will be? They would have said, well, right where they're at right now. And who do you think somebody could create a competitor that would just obliterate Sears? Oh no, it will never happen. They're the dominant retailer. And I'm sure that there were many people within the executive leadership of Sears that thought the same thing. They thought, we're invincible, we're Sears. Look at this giant tower we're in, all the communities we're in. And if you had said, well, there's this guy in Arkansas who's setting up his own retail establishment, they'd probably say, oh yeah, we know of him. He's small potatoes. He's no threat. Or if you had said, hey, there's some other guy that's going to start a business in his garage where you can order things by mail and totally destroy you, they would have said, we've got the Sears catalog. We dominate mail order retail. What are you talking about? Yet Amazon was started in a garage. The Sears catalog was discontinued when it had been a staple of American homes for a century. And we saw Sam Walton and Walmart grow into today's retail behemoth. So the two retail behemoths today in the United States would be Walmart and Amazon. Sears is pretty much non-existent. There might, I don't know, there might be one or two stores out there. Let me know in the comments below if there's still a Sears near you. I don't think there is. I could be wrong. But the point I'm trying to make is when this institutional inertia takes over and people think they're invulnerable, they let their guard down. And that's what happened to Israel, is Israel became over-reliant on high-tech technology. They really probably discounted the abilities of the enemy to be able to gather the intelligence they did, to carry out the sophisticated operations they did. And they thought, well, this wall is impenetrable, and we have these things set in place. We have these processes set in place. If anyone tries to breach this wall, these things will happen. Unfortunately, Hamas probably knew those processes, and that helped them to exploit vulnerabilities that Israel was unaware of. So, guys, the very thought that this was impossible very well, I believe, contributed to why it happened and the ability of Hamas to make this happen. And so you may hear all of these people saying, oh, it's impossible, it's impossible. No, it's very much possible for the reasons that we just talked about. And unfortunately, as we move forward, you can say, well, what happens next? What happens in the days and weeks ahead? Well, I would say, unfortunately, it makes it more likely we will see this conflict escalate because Israel is going to be taking steps to close any vulnerabilities that may exist. They're going to have a heightened sense of awareness. Any of institutional inertia or sort of laziness or, oh, we're invulnerable, all of that went out the window on October 7th. So they're moving very quickly to try to figure out what are other vulnerabilities that we have and how can we, de-risk ourselves to those. And so you have a country like Iran, which in all likelihood was the intelligence apparatus behind Hamas helping them plan this operation. Iran knew about these vulnerabilities, and it's very likely they know of other vulnerabilities as well. And they're going to want to act on those before Israel has a chance to react and close those vulnerabilities. So, guys, that makes this a very dangerous time that we're in right now, where Iran and its allies are going to look at this and say, okay, this is our time to act. We have Israel caught by surprise. We have them on the ropes. We learned of these vulnerabilities before. They're going to catch on and close these. Because, guys, one of the good news about all of this is there's a big difference between a nation state and a retailer. So Sears, when Sears was facing these external threats, there was a high likelihood that their best talent at Sears, the ones that could successfully navigate these challenges, said, you know what? I'm going to leave this slow-moving, sort of backward, not forward-thinking organization, Sears, and I'm going to hop over to Walmart because this Sam Walton guy, he really understands it. Or I'm going to go over to Kmart, or I'm going to go over to Amazon. But nobody in the Israeli government is saying to themselves, hey, Hamas is forward-thinking, let me go join them. That's not going to happen. So the best talent in Israel is still there, and right now they're working around the clock to identify what are the other areas where we're vulnerable. What are the areas we're most susceptible to attack? What could our enemy do next? How do we close that window of opportunity? How do we protect ourselves from this? How do we shield ourselves from this? And that doesn't happen overnight. that type of organizational change and the implementation that needs to take place doesn't happen overnight, but it will happen. And Iran has to know that. Israel's adversaries have to know that. And so any intelligence they're sitting on right now that shows a vulnerability to Israel, in addition to this one we saw on the border wall, they're going to want to exploit that before that vulnerability is shut off, before adequate defenses are put in place by Israel. So that makes right now the likelihood, the probability of an escalation of this war much higher than it otherwise would be, and much higher than it will be 6 months from now or a year from now. So guys, we live in a time where we have a higher probability that we'll see this type of attack take place, but it's important we put out the truth. Again, I have no problem with people asking questions and asking tough questions of Israel and its leadership, but it's important that the truth gets out. And it's very clear to me that this premise that this was impossible and therefore Israel had to know about this attack in advance, to me is absolutely false. Doesn't mean that they didn't somehow. That's possible, but show me the evidence. But it's patently false to claim that it's impossible to breach this border without some sort of insider knowledge or insider help, because clearly the narratives that are linked in the description explain how that happened. But we also know, again, the premise widely believed by many people that Israel was invulnerable to such an attack, that its intelligence agencies knew everything going on, created the conditions that gave rise to this. And remember, terrorists only have to be right once, but those who want to stop them have to be right 100% of the time to stop that from happening. So we may not hear about attacks that are stopped. Sometimes we hear about them, oftentimes we don't, but we're certainly going to hear about the ones that succeed. And so again, this is a false premise. It keeps getting put out there. I was going to address this in the past, hoping it would just go away, but it has not gone away. So this needs to be addressed head on with the truth. Yes, this was possible. Clearly it happened. It took place. There's reasonable explanations for why and how it took place. But it's a false premise to say that any nation, any organization is perfect and invulnerable. It downplays the capabilities of the enemy, in this case Hamas, and their ability to collect intelligence, to put together a strategy to exploit these vulnerabilities, especially when you consider that they almost certainly had help from Iran in doing this. So again, going forward, I would expect this to escalate. Now, it's just my personal opinion. You know, I could be wrong, certainly, but I think that it's highly unlikely at the same time that Iran directly gets involved in this conflict. And the reason I state that is because they've spent many years and many billions of dollars training and equipping these proxy armies precisely so that they can have plausible deniability. They can attack Israel using these proxies and then step back and say, it's not us, we didn't do it. Therefore, if Israel attacks Iran, Iran can go to the international community and say, we didn't do anything and they're just attacking us. And they can isolate Israel on the world stage, isolate Israel diplomatically. That's what we're seeing the push for, is to try to isolate Israel, make Israel look like the bad guy in all of this rather than the victim. Guys, we need to be standing up for truth. We need to be defending Israel. We need to stand for truth no matter what it says. But again, this premise, guys, we need to attack it as soon as we hear it. It's just false to say that Israel's military organization, their intelligence organization, was invincible, and therefore this could not have happened without insider knowledge. It's completely false, and we need to call that out for what it is. Now, if there's evidence that comes out sometime later showing otherwise, so be it, but that still doesn't change the fact that the premise is false. So guys, what do you think? Leave your comments below. Now, I normally say all comments are welcome. All comments are welcome as long as you're within the bounds of civil discussion. So leave your comments below. Make sure to hit the like, share, and subscribe buttons, and God willing, I will see you on Friday. Bye. If you want to learn more about the end times and Bible prophecy, make sure to sign up for my free monthly newsletter and get your copy of my free ebook, 7 Signs of the End Times. Just follow the link in the description to get your free book. Also, make sure to check out all of my books. Just look up Britt on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Apple iBooks, Google Books, Kobo, or anywhere books are sold. Thanks for watching today, and until next time, keep your eyes fixed on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith.